Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Rebecca Williams. She's a storytelling and public speaking expert, and she has trained leaders at Google, Meta, and Netflix, and she'll share powerful storytelling and communication techniques. We'll learn about how one can overcome nerves, engage listeners, and become a confident speaker, whether on stage, in meetings, or in life. Welcome to the show, Rebecca.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show, Rebecca. Welcome to India in this online form. I know you have been in India for yoga, so that this is another form of coming in. So, welcome back to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll learn about how one can master public speaking and storytelling. We'll learn all that. But before that, let's learn a bit about your journey, your background, so that people know who they are listening to.
Of course, thank you. So my background started when I was a kid. My dad was an opera director. So similar to the way a director directs a film, my dad directed operas. And so when I was a kid, he often invited me onto the stage to play different roles in the operas because he needed children playing, children's roles, for example. And so from a young age, I got really comfortable with being on the stage and loved performing, so to speak. And so from there, I ended up teaching English abroad. I taught English in a lot of different countries. I lived in Japan, Nepal, Spain, Australia, teaching English. And I found that I really loved helping people express themselves, not necessarily from a stage, but just express what was going on inside of them. And from there, when I moved back to the States, I didn't want to teach English anymore. I got kind of bored of that. And so I started doing consulting work with tech companies. And I found that my skill set, helping people express themselves, especially doing public speaking from stages, was really useful for leadership in these tech companies. For example, Google, Meta, Netflix. And then eventually I got a position teaching public speaking and communication skills, leadership communication, and storytelling at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. So through all of that experience, I started my own business, and I've been working with leaders and individuals ever since. And I really love what I do because I believe it's so important for people to be able to express themselves really well, because everybody has something to say and everybody has some personal experience that can help others grow and work through difficulties in their lives. So it's really important for me to be able to help people to do that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, why do you think public speaking is such a important skill, especially for leaders?
Yeah, well, public speaking, let's first talk about what that is. I think a lot of people, they think that public speaking is doing a TED Talk, right? And doing a TED Talk, sure, that's one way of public speaking, but that's not the only way. Public speaking is also standing up in a meeting and expressing yourself, or standing in front of two people. It's any position where you are expressing what's going on inside of you to one or more people. That's public speaking. So essentially, the way I see communication skills in public speaking is it's the way that you connect with the outside world. Because, like, imagine you can't talk. If you can't talk, then you're not able to connect in a particular way with those outside of your internal mental space. And that's very limiting. So being able to express what's inside to the outside is a way for you to connect on a deeper level with the people in your lives and have better relationships and make an impact with the world. So that's why public speaking is important to be able to do well.
Right, right, Rebecca. You say that your public speaking is like a conversation, not a
Mhm.
performance. Can you help us understand in a bit of detail?
Yeah. Well, I have had my own struggles with this because, as I said, when I was a kid, my dad asked me, well, didn't ask me. I was 6 years old. He told me, he said, get on the stage, play this role. And I did. And I learned how to perform quite well. But what's true, and one of the reasons why people struggle so much with public speaking is that they think they have to perform. They think that they have to be someone else and play a role. But what's actually true is that when you show up and when you engage in public speaking, you actually just want to be more of yourself. You want to bring more energy, you want to bring more passion, and you want to bring more clarity to what you're saying so that whatever you're saying lands. And the real disconnect that I see is that people think that they need to be someone else. They need to be someone they're not. And that's a really challenging ask. I mean, who would you be if you got on stage and you thought you had to be someone else? It's a difficult proposition. And that's why a lot of people, no, not everyone can be an actor because it's really hard work. And so a lot of people think that they have to be an actor to get on the stage and do public speaking, but it's actually, that's the wrong approach. So that's what I teach with the people I work with.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I agree with you on a personal level. If I see it, you have to be yourself. How can you be someone else when people want to talk to you, listen to you, and not to anyone else? And public speaking obviously cannot be acting. It is something different. You prepare for it, you play a role. That's a very different. Public speaking is certainly not that. But I want to understand, in terms of the mistakes, then on a wider level, what are the biggest mistakes that people generally make when they are preparing for a presentation or even for a public speaking?
For sure. Yeah. Well, mistake number one is that they focus too much on themselves. So I have struggled with this in my life as well. I'll tell you a story. When I think it was maybe 10 years ago, I was asked to do a presentation for International Women's Day in San Francisco. And I was really excited. I love public speaking. I love presenting from stages. So I did the work. I wrote the script. I memorized it. I even got a new jacket, this cool black jacket with these big shoulder pads. And then the day came and I got on the stage and I looked out into the audience and I launched into my content. And then I got to the third line and I blanked out. I totally forgot what I was going to say. So I had to restart. I took a pause. I restarted. And then I got to the third line again and I blanked out again. And you can imagine how I was feeling at that moment. I was completely embarrassed. I just wanted to walk off the stage, but I thought, no, I need to finish this. So I managed to start again. I got through the talk and then I snuck away. Essentially, I didn't hang around after that because I was so embarrassed. But the mistakes I made that day were this. Number one, I was focused too much on myself. I was focused on how do I look? I'm going to get a new jacket. I want to sound good. So it's all focused in I. And what's true, and one of the quotes that I share with people I work with is actually, it's from India. It's from Gandhi. And Gandhi says, you come alive when you show up in service to others. And that's really the antidote to what that mistake was that day for me. And the mistake that so many people make is they focus too much on themselves and they forget, like, hey, I'm meant to be in service to my audience here. And so when you shift your gaze away from yourself and you focus on your audience and you ask yourself the question, what does my audience need? What does my audience need to learn? How can I connect with my audience so that they really take away what I'm saying here? That's the key to, again, having this conversation with your audience instead of making it be a performance. So focusing on yourself too much is one of the biggest mistakes I see. Another mistake I see, and it's same from that story I just told, when people try to memorize their talks, it's often really hard to do. Yes, if you're doing a TED Talk, there are actually two schools of thought on this. A lot of people believe, oh, you should really memorize your TED Talk. Okay, fine. If you have 6 months to memorize your TED Talk and make it muscle memory, then go for it. You can do that, and that's great. But a lot of people don't have that amount of time to spend memorizing a talk. I see most people I work with, they're creating their talks and then they're delivering them the next day or 2 days later. They're really not giving themselves enough time to get familiar with their content. But definitely trying to memorize a talk, it's a recipe for disaster unless you're a trained actor and you have this practice and you know how to do that. So instead of memorizing, what I coach people to do is familiarize. So what are the key points that you want to hit? What order do you want to hit them? What are your transitions between those points? And when you have those internalized, familiarized, then you're free to be much more organic and much more dynamic in your talk and less rigid. Because when I was talking about how I failed on International Women's Day, I was too rigid. I was too attached to each single word. And then when I made a little mistake with one word, I didn't know what to do. And that caused me to blank out. So those are the two main mistakes I see people making.
Absolutely. So when you talk of focus, uh, people think, I'm an expert and I'm a speaker, so I should focus on myself because the audience wants to listen to me. Then
Mhm.
how do I keep the focus on the audience and still keep the focus on my expertise? How do I
Mhm.
do that balancing act?
Yeah. It comes to service. So I'll give you an example. I'm teaching a workshop next week for the European Innovation Commission, and they have a cohort of about 30 women, and I'm going to be teaching persuasive speaking. So I have a lot of content that I can draw from. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I can take this, I can take that, I can take that, I can mix them up. That's focusing on content, which you need to do that, right? But in order to get to the content, I need to get intimate with the people that I'm working with. So I've already had a one-on-one with the woman who's the point person at the European Innovation Commission. I asked her a lot of questions about the audience. I'm going to send another email today because I have a lot more questions. Essentially, I want to know this audience before I even get on the stage. I want to feel very intimate with them and what they're struggling with, what they're going through, because I want my content to match their pain points. If I'm just creating stuff because whatever, I don't know, I think I'll talk about this. This is what they want to hear, and I don't really know what they're struggling with, then that's going to do a couple things. Number one, it might not meet their needs, which is a shame. It's a waste. But number two, and this is what I found time and time again, if I'm not really clear about what my audience needs and like what pain points they're struggling with, then when I get on stage, I am less confident and I'm more anxious because I'm wondering, I wonder if this is going to land. Instead of doing my homework ahead of time and knowing, I know this is going to help them because I've learned this about them before they get on stage. And another trick that I like to teach people, because sometimes we're speaking to much larger audiences, maybe it's 500 people or 1,000 people, and you can't get super intimate with that many people, right? You're guessing a lot of the time. But what really helps to bring down that anxiety, that nervousness, which is totally normal and natural, by the way, but a way you can bring it down is to make some allies in the audience before you go on stage. So literally, I mean, before you get on the stage, whether it's on a Zoom call or if it's in person, go into the audience and shake someone's hand and say, hey, what's your name? Why did you come to this talk today? What are you hoping to learn? And just talking to that one person is going to help you feel like you have a mandate to talk, because John wants to learn about storytelling. Well, great. I'm going to talk about storytelling. This is wonderful. If it's a Zoom call and you don't have the luxury of being able to walk into the audience and shake a hand, go on LinkedIn and find out something about someone who's going to be in the audience. This is really helpful for interviews too. If you're going to do an interview online, go research that person on LinkedIn. And sometimes just seeing their smiling profile photo is enough to help you bring that anxiety level down and make a connection with the person and focus more on them instead of on yourself. So does that answer your question? Do you have like a more detailed situation that you want me to address?
This is fine. Let's understand, a couple of other points here. I want to understand, in terms of the memorizing part. A lot of people can memorize, a lot of people cannot
Mm-hmm.
memorize. I
Mm-hmm.
am amongst the people who cannot memorize. Forget
Yeah.
about 6 months. Even if you give me an year, I won't be able to memorize a speech if that is what I need to give.
Right.
So
Yeah.
how do people then balance it out? What is the best way to make sure that they don't forget anything important, but at the same time, they don't want to memorize anything? What's the best trick here?
Okay, great. I'm so glad you're asking this question because I get this all the time. A lot of people struggle with memorizing. I hate memorizing. I'm not good at it, so I don't do it either. So let me ask you a question. In your work, are there some phrases or some sentences that you feel like you're always saying over and over again? Can you think of one?
Yes. If I am talking, if you must have heard also, wonderful, because we are communicating. Absolutely. Something like that. I keep on talking about, just like, because I consider this as a conversation, nothing beyond that. Means it's not a performance, and my job is to make sure that enough value comes out of my guest to for the
Mhm.
audience. I'm just a person, a catalyst in between, nothing else.
Right, right. Well, I'll give you an example from my work. So essentially, I'm an educator, I'm a trainer. And so I have certain key phrases that I say over and over again because they make up my methodology. So, for example, one of the things I say all the time is the more you say, the less they remember. The more
Okay.
you say, the less they remember. So, this is internalized in me now. I've said it so many times that it's not memorized per se, but it's just something I say all the time. So I don't need to even think about that. It just comes out of my mouth. Now, when I'm teaching this point, I have lots of stories and lots of examples that I can give to back up this point. And I pull them from my lived experience and from my life at random. Sure, I can prepare which ones I want to share based on my audience. But that phrase, the more you say, the less they remember, that phrase is not going to change because that's something I'm always saying. Now, I imagine a lot of the people in your audience, they are professionals and they are subject matter experts on something, and they know a lot of things in their very specific niche field. And I'm sure that they have those phrases internalized and memorized, so to speak. So, what I coach people to do is really anchor on those phrases. So, for example, this training I'm going to do next week, I'm going to have 3 phrases that I'm anchored in. And as long as I know what those phrases are, and what order I want to share them in, because I'm always walking people towards some understanding and it's important to scaffold understanding. As long as I know the order and I know the examples that I want to give, then the content writes itself. And for example, I'm always coaching people to use storytelling to share examples because people remember stories and they're relatable. And also they're easier for the speaker to remember, to tell, because stories are easily remembered. So when I'm anchoring in those phrases and I'm able to share the stories, the content writes itself. The content writes itself. And one more thing that I'll recommend is, so for example, if I have 3 of these phrases that I'm anchoring in, 1, 2, 3. One, either I lead with the phrase or I end that section with the phrase. So an example of that is maybe the more you say, the less they remember. Maybe I'll lead with the story, and the end of the story is that phrase. And that's when I learned the more you say, the less they remember. So I can lead to the phrase or I can begin with the phrase. The more you say, the less they remember. I tell a story to back it up or or illustrate that point. And then what I need in addition to that chunk right there, because it's all, for me, it's very visual. What's the first chunk? What's the second chunk? The third chunk to get through our talk? After that first chunk, you want to know, okay, how am I going to get to the next chunk, that next phrase that's going to help me share what I want to share? And that transition is some kind of transition statement. So, for example, so we've talked about how the more you say, the less they remember. Now, I want to tell you about when I was a kid and blah, blah, blah. And then you lead into that next section, but you need to know how you're going to lead into it so it's not abrupt. Okay. So really for me, I think about it visually, and I'll just use paper and I'll quiz myself. Okay, what's the order that I'm going to share this content in? What is the transition I'm going to use? And I'll quiz myself. And once you get that in muscle memory, I think you'll find that it's easy to show up in a dynamic and very natural way and still hit the points that you need to hit.
Absolutely, absolutely. Rebecca, one more thing I want to understand for the audience is you talked about things that, at one point in time, you forgot things at the stage. It happens.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even, I think I will forget even my name while speaking if I have to do that.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that.
It can happen. It just happens sometimes, So anyone can face that particular, just the loss of nerves, the nervousness on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
How did you tackle that point in time? How should people tackle something? You said, you began again and then you, but what was the audience reaction? What is it that audience sees that point in time? Are they with you or are they against you? Till when are they with you? When do they turn against you? How do you handle all these things? Because I'm not perfect. I cannot be perfect, and one should not expect them to be perfect.
Yeah,
How do
I
you handle
agree.
those situations if it happens on the stage?
Yeah, I really love this question. I especially love the angle of how long are they with you? I think that's fantastic. So that story I told, another mistake I made, and this is going to lead into how do you prevent this and how do you deal with it? Another mistake I made is that I didn't connect with the audience first. I didn't attempt to make a connection. What I did, and again, it's from my upbringing on the stage with my dad, is I launched into a performance. I just started saying my lines. I didn't ask a question. I didn't look into the audience and make these connections with people. And the easiest way to do that is just to ask a question. Lead with the question. It's the easiest way to make a connection. And then once you make that connection with the audience, then it's easier for you to have the conversation, right? Because you can imagine trying to have a conversation with someone, but you don't lead with the question. What happens? It just becomes a dialogue. And then how long are they with you? Well, they're going to get bored pretty fast because they're like, this person doesn't really care if I'm listening or not. They're just talking. They just want to hear themselves talk. And that's what we want to avoid. So making a connection with your audience, asking a question, whether you get them to answer or not, it doesn't matter. Asking a question to make that connection and then moving on. Now, another thing you asked is how does one deal with the situation when they blank out on stage? And what I did in that moment was I just stopped and I started again. But in retrospect, what I would do differently, and again, this is what I coach people to do, is admit that you're feeling nervous. Just admit it and say like, wow, I'm really nervous right now. And then ask a question. How does it feel for you guys in the audience? Right? So allowing yourself to be vulnerable, it is incredibly connecting. It builds rapport with your audience because it shows that you're human. I mean, like you said, no one's perfect. No one's perfect. And, frankly, people in the audience, they do not want to be on the stage. So they're really rooting for you. They want you to do a good job. And if you're struggling, they don't feel good. They don't want you to struggle. So the best thing to do is just be really honest and say, wow, I'm really nervous right now. Like, how is it for you guys? And then allow them to respond, and then start again. So that's what I would have done differently. And that's what I coach people to do now, because yeah, none of us are perfect. And showing that vulnerability, that's really when things get magical.
Absolutely. But let's look at another situation. You have,
Mhm.
trained a lot of people, all these big organizations, Google, Meta, Netflix, and many a times leaders have to speak.
Uh-huh.
Leaders have to, in a way, perform.
Hmm.
They have to make, many a times you have to take decisions which you yourself are not agreeing with, but because you have to take it, you have taken it. And you have
Hmm.
to convince your employees, all the large number of employees in such organizations or anywhere else, with what you are saying.
Hmm.
And many a times, that can become a challenge. Or many
Hmm.
a times you can also blank out, because after all, you are human and you are not perfect. But people here is not that audience. Here they see you as a leader. How do you then balance that, as part of a human sort of a person, and which people are not looking in that human form, and they are waiting to, maybe they won't, speak against you at that point in time, but that certainly will not be with you. How do you manage that situation, especially if you are a leader?
Yeah, let me paraphrase what you said back to you to make sure I'm getting it right. So what I hear you saying is that leaders have to be persuasive. They have to guide teams into the direction that grows the company. And sometimes that can be challenging, and sometimes it can be difficult. So how does a leader be more persuasive? How does a leader guide their team? Is that what you're asking?
Absolutely, without exerting your authority, but using your communication skills.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things that I coach leaders to do all the time is tell more stories, because it's one thing to stand in front of your team and say, I know that we can do this. I know that we can grow revenue by 20%. Everyone here is capable of this. Okay, so this is motivational speaking, right? And we can do this, that's fine. But what we also want is we want illustrations, we want examples, we want to feel connected to this content. That's not just platitudes, it's not just fancy words that anyone could say. So, what we want to do is we want to tell stories from our own lives as leaders, or we want to tell stories of other companies who have done it, and use that as a motivational tool for other people. So, I'll give you an example. I was working with a leader from a company in Denmark the other day, and he leads a team of about 20 people, and he was struggling to get his team along for the ride. You know, they were sluggish and not really performing the way they needed to. And so I asked him, I said, okay, well, how are you trying to convince them, or like, what are you saying now? And he said, well, I'm saying, hey, we can do this, we can raise the revenue. So he's got all the motivational stuff, but he didn't have anything that felt real. He didn't have anything that felt vulnerable or authentic. He was acting kind of like a robot, or like a plastic leader. And so I asked him, I said, well, when was the time in your life where you achieved a goal that was really challenging for you? And he said, well, I run marathons, and marathons are really hard because you run so far and your body is shutting down, but you want to keep going. You want to reach the goal. So you have to coach yourself through those moments. And I said, tell the story of the last marathon you ran and how hard that was and how you coached yourself through that. And so he did. He managed to work that into his next talk. And he said it was very successful because not only did it give the team like this understanding, and almost like it was okay to feel nervous about achieving the goal. Like, are we going to do it or not? But it showed him as being vulnerable because it allowed, number one, it allowed them into his life a little bit because he shared something about himself that wasn't just, I'm the leader, but it's, no, I run marathons. So you guys, here's the one thing you don't know about me. I run marathons and they're really hard. And here's how I get myself through those marathons. So it makes him relatable. It makes him human. And then it helps the team have a basis for understanding of, oh, okay, this is going to be challenging and we can do it, just like he was able to run this marathon. So storytelling is it's super important for leaders because it humanizes us, but it also gives their team an understanding of, like, hey, this is not going to be easy. And we've all done things that aren't easy, and we're going to be able to do this together again. So that's what I really coach leaders on. It's the storytelling piece and being relatable and being authentic with their teams.
Absolutely, Rebecca. There's so much to learn from you about all these things. I'm sure there is really a lot to learn from your new book. Tell us a bit about your new book so that people can know, learn from you.
Yeah. I'm really proud of this book. I've got it right here. I'll show it to you. So it's called Presenting, The Art of Public Speaking and How to Do It Better. And I'm proud of this book because what I saw in teaching leaders and individuals over 10 years at this point, these public speaking and communication skills, especially presentation skills, is I saw the same struggles all the time. People having anxiety on stage, not knowing how to tell stories, not feeling like their stories were valuable to share. And really, I wrote this book because it's so important for me that people speak up and share their voices. I mean, in a world where fascism is on the rise, and I think a lot of people feel like their voice doesn't matter right now, but it absolutely does matter. And what's important is that when you share your voice, you know how to do it in a way that it really lands. So teaching things in this book, like how to tell a better story, how to put your audience first, how to communicate with confidence and credibility and clarity so that your messages land. That's really important for me because I want everyone to feel inspired to take the mic. I want them to be able to overcome that anxiety and share what matters to them, because that's how the world becomes a better place. That's how we function better as a society, and we work together in harmony to solve problems. So that's why I wrote this book. And yeah, for anyone who feels compelled to share their voice, or who maybe doesn't know how to do that and they feel intimidated by it, then I encourage you to get the book. It's very readable. It's very entertaining. There are a lot of stories and jokes, and it's not academic, but it's very conversational and very relatable. So yeah, I encourage you to get the book and learn from it what you can.
Absolutely. And what's the best way for people to connect with you, maybe become your client?
Yeah. So I am very active on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn. And my profile is Rebecca Williams Works, as in I work, right? Works with an S. So Rebecca Williams Works on LinkedIn. And you can also find my book on my website. So it's rebecca-williams.com. And then you'll see the book there. You can grab a copy of it. Yeah, but please
Wonderful.
do. I encourage you guys, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love connecting with people one-on-one, and I love India. I really appreciated my time there back in 2013. I learned so much, and what a beautiful culture. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.